segment of the Pragati Literature Festival. Today, we are launching the Pragati Literature Festival Junior. So let's get ready for an exciting exploration of the magical world of children's books, where stories come alive and imagination soars. Joining us today are three incredible guests to understand the magic of children's books. First, we have Miss Deepa Agarwal, who is a prolific author, poet and translator with over 60 books for children as well as adults. Her work has garnered numerous awards and accolades, including recognition from NCRT, IEBY, and a senior fellowship from the Ministry of Culture. She has presented many papers at seminars and conferences in India as well as abroad. So, ma'am, I call you. Up next, we have Miss Stuti Gupta. With over 17 years in publishing, she is chief editor at Stuti Publishers. With an MPhil in comparative literature, she bridges the gap between books and readers, fostering learning through innovative methods. Ma'am, I welcome you to today's session. And last but definitely not the least, we have Ridhan Jain, a very special guest who happens to be a 10-year-old author. He's an exceptional talent and began his literary journey at 7, founding Lives World Publishing. As one of India's youngest authors, he has expanded his work with 3 more books and various audiobooks. Recognized as the youngest motivational speaker and audiobook narrator, he inspires through philanthropy and his Because I Can with Ridhan podcast. So I welcome you to today's session. And let's give a warm round of applause to all of our panelists for today.
So first of all, I will introduce myself. My name is Muskan and I will be the moderator for today's session. And let's begin with today's discussion. So I would like to pose the first question to our panelists. Can you share your journey into the world of children's literature? What encouraged you to choose this genre and how has the experience been so far? So Ms. Deepa, if you would like to begin.
Thank you so much, Muskan. Well, this has been a very long journey. I began my writing career as a freelancer, writing articles of general interest, for newspapers and magazines. But, at that time, there used to be a wonderful children's magazine, which was in the 80s, 1980s, and I used to subscribe to it for my children. And one day I was just flipping through the magazine and the idea struck me that why don't I try writing a children's story? And I did that. Now, it just so happened that my first story was rejected. And this is what happens to many of us. But the rejection letter that I received was extremely encouraging. The editor of Target magazine, which was brought out by the India Today group, was a lady called Rosalind Wilson. And she suggested that I try again. And I did. And writing for Target turned out to be a real learning experience for me. And in fact, many of the children's writers and illustrators who went on to make their names in this field also all contributed to Target at that time. And then later on, I got some prizes in the Children's Book Trust competitions. And when my first book was published, it was such a thrill, and it struck me that this was what I wanted to do. Though I continued to write, for the general readership, for adults as well as children, but I began to write more and more for children. And as an adult, writing for children, I feel, you enter such a wonderfully enchanting world. This is a world which is, you relive your own childhood and the wonder that you experienced with discovery. So, this is what really hooked me to writing for children. And I must say it's been a wonderful journey with all the the encouraging, rewarding responses that I've received, not only from my readers, but from my publishers and editors.
So Ms. Stuti, would you like to go next?
Deepa mentions that writing for children being an adult is an experience in itself. My writing journey for children actually started parallel to my motherhood journey because my son refused to eat his meals if I didn't tell him a new story every single time, every meal time. So after a while, I had run out of stories that I already knew, and I had to go back to other books or websites that narrated stories for children. And I realized that there was, while there were so many fairy tales out there, the Cinderellas and the Snow Whites and Pinocchio, there were very few stories that actually came from the heart of India, which is why my writing also delves more into mythological stories and Indian history and stories that come from the very heart of the Indian tradition. So that's how I started exploring stories to tell my son, who was 2.5 years at that time. And then he used to tell me, Mama, आज वही वाली story सुनाओ जिसमें ऐसा हुआ था, and I would have no memory of it because I cooked it up on the basis of one line. So I started keeping a record of those stories in voice notes and notes in my diaries, and that's how my books came into being later.
Alright, so now let's hear from Radhan.
Storytelling came naturally to me since I was the age of 4. Funnily, instead of my grandparents and parents, it used to be me who would tell them the stories. Thank you. So continuing, my parents in the lockdown, they had told me to write stories to keep me away from TV and mobile games. It was a master stroke. It changed my life forever. I believe books are just more than a bunch of papers and some little text on it. It is a medium of communication. It teaches us what is right and what is wrong, how things are supposed to be done, and how should we live our lives. And trust me, I know, I'm a bookworm myself. Through books, we don't only learn through the models, but we learn from the story itself, the characters, the situation, as well the topics. And that covers a wide range of issues, behavioral way of living to inclusivity, to acceptance, to patriotism, to culture, to mythology, and many more. Books are very, very powerful tools, and wielding them is a great responsibility, especially for the authors that write them. My father, he always says that children are like blank papers who are born with their own characteristics. It's the parents and the surroundings who will make them who they will be today. Competent for the world or leave them to struggle. And books are a part of those surroundings. They can influence you in positive and negative ways, depending on what they communicate. When I initially started writing, I wrote whatever came to my heart and mind. But now, in my coming novel, The Mellifluous Odyssey, I am mostly focusing on how can I make the readers enjoy, how can I share my understanding through the characters, situation and struggles. So how many of you have read Harry Potter? Please raise your hands. Well, I'm sure most of you, almost all of you have read, because it's one of the most popular books in the world, and it's for a good reason. It's not because it's very fun and exciting, but it's because of the source of inspiration and education. It teaches us loyalty, courage, love, friendship, and to fight for what is right. It shows us the diversity and richness between different cultures, like the wizarding world, the muggle world, and those magical creatures. It makes us appreciate and respect the differences among us. So not all books are like Harry Potter. Some books can communicate wrong things, such as violence, hatred, ignorance. They can misinform, manipulate, or brainwash. And that's why we authors must be careful about what we write. We must be ethical. We have to be honest, respectful, responsible. Because books are just books. They are mediums of communication that can change the world. And we readers need to be aware about that. We need to choose wisely what we read and what we learn from them. We need to be critical, curious, and open-minded. We need to be authors who can make a difference.
नमस्कार,
Thank
कृपया
you.
ध्यान दें। दिव्यांशु
So these are
12
three
वर्षीय
very different
और
journeys
बढ़िया
that we
जी।
have such a diverse panel
आपके
today,
मित्र
but it's
दरवेश
really
जी
good to
आपके
hear about
विचारों
them.
के
So I
हॉल
would
नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन काउंटर पर खड़े हैं। दिव्यांशु जहाँ कहीं भी हैं हॉल नंबर 5 के रिसेप्शन काउंटर पर आ जाएं।
Okay, so I was saying that it was really nice to hear of all three of your journeys because we have such a diverse panel today. It's really nice to hear. So I would continue on with the next question, which is the process of creating a children's book involves careful thinking on language, themes, and visual elements like illustrations. So can you walk us through your creative process from the initial spark of an idea to the finished product? So Deepa ji.
Yeah, you're very right. It's, the writing a children's book is quite different from writing a book for adults. The thing is, children's books are for children of different age groups, and each age group has different demands, and each genre of writing also has different demands. I mostly begin by drawing on an incident that I have personally experienced. Many of my stories are drawn from something that happened to me in my childhood or something that happened to my children. So in that sense, many of my stories are rooted in real life. And when I come across an incident which I feel has a lot of scope for, it has emotional expression or for a value-based message. I really like what Jiridhan said, that as authors we have to be very careful of what we are putting into our stories. And so I'll give the example of one of my short stories called Fire, which is actually based on an incident that took place in my childhood when my friend and I were playing. I belong to the hills of Uttarakhand. When my friend and I were playing, and in play we set the forest on fire. And it was a terrible catastrophe. But when I look back on that incident, I thought of it because as a child I could not see deeper into the whole sequence of events. And I retold it later on in life to answer a question that loomed in my head. And this story is in my collection, Friendship Stories, which should be available at this Scholastic store. Now, coming to picture books. When you're writing a picture book, then you have to visualize each scene. And I use a particular format. For each page, I think of the possibilities for the artist to illustrate that particular scene. So that is a different kind of planning and different kind of thinking. For other stories, mostly you're thinking of the plot development or the characterization, the dialogue, etc. But picture books have a different demand. Now, when it comes to historical fiction, then I usually begin with research. Of course, that too begins with an idea. One of my well-known historical fictions, Caravan to Tibet, is based on my family history. And actually, since I had moved away, my grandfather had moved away from his village, I was very curious to know about the life that people had led out there. And that is how I came to write this book, Caravan to Tibet. And I did a lot of research. It took me a long time to write this book. But all the research had to be in place so that I could give as credible an account of the times as I could. So these are the different, methods I use to develop my stories.
Stuti, would you like to talk about the writing process?
I have also been an editor of books for almost 16 years now. So my perspective on books comes from both sides. As a publisher,
दिव्यांशु 12 वर्षीय बच्चा और बजिया जी, आपके साथ ही दुर्वेश जी आपका हॉल संख्या 5 में रिसेप्शन काउंटर पर आपका इंतजार कर रहे हैं।
so I look at it from
कृपया जल्द से जल्द वहां आए।
One more time, they will announce. They announce 2 times.
I hope they find the kid.
Every day.
So as a publisher, I think of it in terms of technically producing the book as a product that it has to go out. It needs to have the written text, it needs to have illustrations and a design element. And then you further break it down into that the text needs to have entertainment, education and a visual appeal that makes the younger reader also pick it up. My books are mostly aimed for ages 6 and above. But I've also heard a lot of parents tell me that they have enjoyed reading the book too. Because somewhere, that inner child thing is real. It works. Maybe perfume or one and the ones that I get for him, I read them first. So I think in creating the book, we need to remember what message we want to put across and how we can weave it beautifully into a story. Because we only learn lessons from stories, I realized. वो बादाम खाने से ठोकर खाने से वो सब बहुत बड़े होके आता है but when you're children and you want to tell them something they will either learn by example, so you either lead the way or you tell them a story where someone else has led the way and told them something that they need to incorporate or inculcate in their lives. So I mix knowledge with a little bit of entertainment, and my usual mantra of writing a book is that I will write whatever I will say while narrating it. So if I have a habit of saying, you know what happened then? So then my sentence in the paragraph is also going to start with that only. So that if a parent is reading out the book to a kid, it feels like a storytelling session. If the kid is reading, it feels like that he's hearing it straight from me. That is what I personally like to follow from my books.
Ridhan, would you like to talk about it?
Making a book is like crafting an immersive experience. Picture this. So as children read, they are visualizing the story, turning it into a captivating challenge for their wild imaginations. So it always starts from the initial idea to the finished product. And yes, illustrations play a very crucial role in all of this. So even the grandparents who have read my books, they appreciate the simplicity of my language, and they even appreciate the engaging illustrations. For me, it's extending experience beyond words. In my personal illustrating experience, it was a delight collaborating with Pragati Maidan. So it was really, really good. We spent hours discussing about stories. We would enjoy with our creativity by playing a few games. And when he showed me the final illustration, I was amazed. I was very amazed because it mirrored what I had in mind, bringing the stories to life. Thank you.
Okay, so now as we're talking about illustrations and storytelling, my next question would be, as storytellers, you have the opportunity to create worlds where anything is possible. So how do you create a balance between realism and fantasy in your writing, making sure your stories are exciting, but still make sense and feel real to the kids?
Well, I usually try to root my story in real life situations, whether it's fantasy or whether it's a historical fiction or it's a picture book story. Like, I'll give you the example of my book, Blessed, which I have out here. Now, Blessed is a fantasy, but it is on the theme of education for girls. And, I got the idea a long time back when the first time the Taliban stopped education for girls. But I didn't want to situate it in real life. I thought it might be interesting and more challenging for me as an author to create a fantasy land where such an order, a law existed that girls are not allowed to receive any education. But I made sure to create characters which are like any of us. They have the same emotions, they have the same needs in their daily lives, they have their routines. Even the imaginary land, it has to have a landscape. The physical features, the geography, everything has to be there in place so that the reader can relate to it and feel, okay, this may not be our country, India, or say the United States. It's an imaginary land, but it is a realistic place where things can happen, things that happen to us as human beings in our daily routine. And apart from that, I feel that description of people and also, as I mentioned, the geographical descriptions, also the dialogue, then also the pace of the story, that's very important. And it's also very important to have some drama so that the reader is engaged. So I try to make my stories very pacey. I revise a lot, and wherever I feel it's dragging, then I try to introduce some action. And I've, Stuti is an editor, and I've learned a lot from my editors. I mentioned Rosalind Wilson earlier, and another editor I have contributed to a magazine in the US. Through my interaction, I have learned a lot about the elements of a good children's story. So that is how I work towards my goal.
Stuti?
I always want to put a bit of magic in my books because what is life without magic anyway? We keep wishing for magic to happen. Kids actually believe that it's for real. So their life is so much easier, so much more fun. They believe that they can do anything. So when we give them a story which gives wings to their curiosity as well as their imagination, they actually learn to believe that they can do anything. I think that is the biggest gift that we can give to kids, especially when we learn to integrate the real world into our stories. And I will just give an extension to what Deepa just said, that the setting of the story has to be realistic. But the second thing that helps readers really connect with the stories or whatever you're writing for children is the emotions, because they remain the same for everyone. So if a character is placed in India, abroad, in heaven, I've even written stories where Indra is crying because he doesn't have a mount and he goes to Brahmaji that my feet are paining, walking so much, please give me something that I can ride on, So the child will suddenly say, yes mama, you got me a bicycle because I got tired of walking so much. So Indra Devta also wants a vehicle for himself. So that relatability of emotions actually I think works out really nicely. They also learn to manage disappointment, anger, happiness, that they don't need to go all crazy when they're too happy or become too sad when things are not going their way. These are very subtle inclusions within the story, but I think they have a larger impact. If you write at the end of the story that this is the moral of the story, they can learn it by rote, but they will not implement it in their life. They will implement what the character did in the story when he or she was in trouble or faced a difficult situation. So I think I would make it more relatable with respect to emotions, as well as placing the setting in a relatable plus illustrations. I am a little very finicky about illustrations. Illustrations have to be pretty looking and action oriented so that the child understands that there's some fun action happening and I get into the action straight away.
Absolutely. As storytellers, my approach is all about captivating the audience, blending real life experiences with a dash of imagination. So I inject a dose of excitement in my stories while keeping it firmly rooted in my own adventures. So let me whisk you back to my 6-year-old self facing off playground bullies. Picture this. The characters in my story aren't your typical superheroes like Batman, Superman, but they are insects, quirky little insects like flies and frogs. I turned my life challenge into a whimsical adventure. So when kids are reading stories, they're not really escaping reality, but they're stepping into a world where the familiar and the fantastical collide, making the story both thrilling and relatable. It's like adding a sprinkle of magic to everyday's experiences.
Okay, so moving on, my next question is, in today's digitally driven world, children have access to a lot of entertainment options. So how do you believe children's books are still important to develop their imagination and critical thinking?
Well, I'll just draw on what Vidhan said about reading, the act of reading. That when you're reading, you are visualizing and you are imagining a situation. Now, ready-made entertainment that you see from the digital world, it doesn't give much scope for the consumer to develop their imagination because they getting a ready-made product. But when you're reading a print book, you are imagining the story, you are interpreting, the actions or the motivation of the characters in your own way. And that is what develops critical thinking. I've been surprised at times how readers have found insights in my stories that had not been in my mind when I was writing. And that was a wonderful thing for me, that there is something that the subconscious is taking out in the act of writing a book. The thing is, the digital entertainment is created I feel it's in a superficial way. I may be totally wrong, I may be, misreading a lot of things. But I think there is much more depth to a print book, a lot more thought goes into it. And of course, a lot of thought goes into digital entertainment also. There's a lot of brainstorming and everything. But again, it's leaving something for your imagination, leaving something for the reader, the consumer, to think and create their own understanding or maybe their own stories or visualizing the characters in their own way. So that's my opinion.
Okay, Stuti.
One thing that I realized in raising a child of my own and also meeting a lot of children in schools that I go out for workshops in, I wasn't this smart at this age. So while they have a lot of exposure, they have a lot of questions, and their questions are so baffling sometimes that I have to struggle with myself to create an answer first and then say it. As an example, my son asked me, he is very fond of a podcast on Spotify about Shivji, and he excitedly tells me at 10:30 at night, Mama, Shivji के बालों में से गंगा रिवर निकलती है, ऐसे क्या? तो अगर हम गंगा रिवर को उल्टा फॉलो करेंगे तो शिवजी तक पहुंच जाएंगे. And in my entire life I have not thought like that, and I don't know what to say to this child. She said, yeah, maybe. Well, let's do this someday. And I'm like, okay, now that's a story I need to find out. So their exposure, they're getting a lot of knowledge through these digital resources, but a digital resource you cannot go back to and refer to. It doesn't give you the privilege of marking out at the touch of your hand what needs to be there. And I think it also gives them a sort of, it grounds them to read the same thing over and over and in a way that they want to read. I might just write one sentence, I need a glass of water. And he will read it, I really need a glass of water if he's thirsty, or I need a glass of water if he's not in the mood. So I'm, like you said, ma'am, I'm leaving it open to interpretation. And in one of the books that I wrote, actually gave an introduction I compiled, was popular Indian fairy tales. So I broke one story into sections, and after every section, ending it at a cliffhanger, I put a question. Do you think he did the right thing by doing this? So that made these children think, and also develop an opinion whether the character should have done that or not. And that connection comes that if he hadn't done it, he wouldn't be in trouble. If he had gone that way, he would have found the treasure. So that logical thinking is actually nurtured, and they learn to find their own way around. They don't need to be spoon-fed. They just take a hint and they pick it up from there.
Vidhan?
Hello? Yes. So books are like these school brain workouts. So when we read, our imagination is getting a real workout session. It's like doing jumping jacks for your brain, but way more fun. You get to picture cool stuff like magic lands and funny characters. And guess what? Books are the superhero of words. So when we read, we get to learn new things. Smart ideas, big words. It's like having a secret code language that makes you feel so cool and smart. So even with this cool digital stuff around, we have books. They are our personal brain gym. They keep our imagination fit and our vocabulary strong. They turn you into a direct detective with super smart thinking powers. So grab a book and let the adventure begin.
Alright, so my next question goes to all of you. What are some unexplored themes in children's literature that you would like to see explored more in the future?
Well, I must say that over the almost 40 years that I've been writing, I've seen a lot of variety develop in our Indian children's literature. And but I do feel that we really need more stories about inclusiveness, about understanding of other cultures, of people who are different from us. We have to sensitize children, create empathy for the person who is different for them. Whether it's a child who has a learning disability and other people think, she or he is not smart, but they don't understand that why it is like that. So it's through stories we can make them understand that this is not that they're not smart. It is just that they are made differently. Or even understanding people from other communities. Unfortunately, there is so much bias, there is so much prejudice floating around. And I think we really need to educate through our stories that we are human beings, we are all the same. We may have different beliefs, but it doesn't mean that someone who has a different set of religious beliefs is your enemy or is someone to be, despised or hated. Apart from that, I think people have some stories on sports or the arts like dance or music and all. I really feel these fields should be explored more because I remember as a child, I used to be very fascinated by stories about ballet dancers and things like that. So we have such a rich culture of dance and music in our country. So I really feel with these themes, that way we also could introduce more knowledge about our classical dance, our classical music, and our art, our traditions of art. So these are the really feel we need to explore more.
So Stuti, what do you?
I actually am going to agree completely and do a +1 on this answer. That we need to learn to celebrate the differences. More than celebrating, actually, accepting the differences and taking them as the normal, the so-called normal. Because the moment you start highlighting something as different, it starts to take on a special place in some ecosystem. I personally don't like that. I once told my son that we are all different, we are all different people, and we have to be okay with that. And he tells me, Mama, what if we are all actually the same inside and we just look different on the outside? And that, coming from a 5-year-old, was an insight that I really thought that he is big enough to understand this. And so when we point out that that person is different, to treat them this way, I think sensitizing and inclusivity has to become the norm, so that they don't see anything as out of the ordinary, and their lives learn to go around it. The second thing is the cultural heritage that we have, and we've been underplaying it for a really long time. One of the reasons why I went back to stories from the heart of India was because there was a lack of it out there, and while I still continue to explore more stories, I've also realized that somewhere we have our preferences and we get stuck to one domain, like mythology or Indian stories have become my domain, but I still feel I want to read more about folk tales. There are horror stories from the British times that have been so famous and they were so popular, and we don't know that those stories are still out there that the kids can read. So I think we just need to be a little more experimental. Obviously, we'll have to censor it for the children on the basis of what age it's being rolled out for. But being a little experimental and also sensitizing them towards being nice in general. And the second, and one more thing that I feel is that we've accepted very easily that life is a race. I somehow don't adhere to that, adage in my life, and I want it to go out to children that life is not a race. You can live at your own pace. You don't have to hurry. You just need your time, and you enjoy life as it comes. So maybe then they learn to celebrate every moment that they live.
Ruhan?
Yes. So, just pretend books are like your friends reading you stories. But how about we make it as a team effort? So, a few unexplored themes which I'd like to see in the future are... So, just picture this. A boy is reading, and he's reading about a cool adventure. He's reading about a hero and a magical kingdom. And when he turns the next page, there is a blank page where he can draw his own hero or his own kingdom. I mean, how would that be? It would be like a mix of storytelling and drawing. So while reading, he can draw beautiful pictures too. How about adding some cool colorings in our imagination? That'd be quite different. So there'd be spaces left in the book where you can color. So recently, my visual publishing team, we published a book of a very young child, Rida Shankar. I mean, in a cool way. So while reading, we can add our fill to a splash of colors. It'd be like having your personal canvas, and I call those hybrid books. 3. So I don't really see this a lot in many books. So I leave blank pages for the reader to write their own thoughts. So in one story there are multiple learnings. So then the reader can write their own morals. So and this is not very common in most stories. So just picture this: a boy is reading, and so there's this moral: sharing is caring, and then there are many morals to that, and he's writing them down. It'd be very beautiful, and especially the children become very creative. 4. I think that in books need to connect with today's time, with what happens today. I like to classic mythology books with futuristic sci-fi. But what I really think books need today is what stories really need to talk today is today's technology like smart TVs, Alexa, AI, Gen AI. So then the children will be able to connect with it. They will be able to imagine it better. It'll be having like a friend next to you who's telling you stories like that. So I really think this should be quite common. So I really hope you all take this idea as an explore themes. Thank you.
Okay, so those are all the questions I had for you all today. And now I would like to pose this to the audience. If they have any questions, they can go ahead and ask them. Okay, so I think that is all for today's session. So I would like to thank all of you, Deepa ji, Stuti ji and Rehan, for your time and answering all these questions. And before we end the session, we have a small token of appreciation for you. So for that, I would like to call Ms. Navita Berry, who is our festival director, to give over a small. So Kavil Gupta, our festival director, for a small token of appreciation.
So really sorry to take all of your time, but I just really wanted to say thank you so much for listening to all of us. And yes, again, please do take this information. I really hope it is useful. And thank you so much for inspiring and encouraging me. Thank you.
So a quick announcement for everyone. If you want to find Ridhan Jain's books, you can contact us for that. For Miss Stuti Gupta's books, you can go to stall of Petal, which is A10. And for Miss Deepa Agarwal's book, you can head over to Penguin, Hachette, Scholastic and HarperCollins. So thank you so much.